Hi, I'm Delorianne with Read For Bookclub, and I'm here with another episode of a deep dive in some of our fabulous Coastal Magic authors. Today we have Tere Michaels, who is a staple at Coastal Magic. She's been with us almost every single year, and I think that having a Coastal Magic without her would just not work. It would be sad.
It would all be so sad. I would be sad.
Her official bio on the Coastal Magic website reads that Tere Michaels writes happily ever after in the big city, with heaps of snark, angst, and humor. Her focus is on characters and all the ridiculous ways they trip through love and life. Her new series, Broadway or Bust, began with her latest release, Snowmageddon. She teaches frequently about the process of writing at Savvy Authors and works as a consultant and editor. Yay! So, Miss Terry, what have you been up to lately?
Lately, um, I have been hopefully coming to the end of writing book 2 of the Broadway and Bust series, which is called Rain and a Detour. And that's been slow going because it was supposed to be a short book, and now it's a really long book, which hopefully people won't be sad about. But it just kept going.
Yeah.
I'm also writing a new to me trope in it, which is second chance romance. I've not really written that before, so it was more challenging than I thought it would be, because I thought I could do this easy, and apparently it was a little bit more difficult than I thought. But that and my business, which is the Writing Garage, which is the umbrella over my developmental editing, my plot whispering, and my teaching. So that's been keeping me quite busy.
Yeah. Busy, busy 2022 then.
Uh, Fairly busy 2022. Not as much results as I would like, but I look at it as gearing up for 2023.
Awesome. Now, you have you are notorious for your generosity when helping other authors. Like, you're right there to talk plot. You're right there to encourage somebody who is giving it a go for the first time. Where does that stem from? What does that mean to you?
Um, well, part of it is just because I love it. And it's also this natural inclination for me. I think of the process of writing all the time. I am fascinated by creative process in general, but the way that writers create things is specifically something that interests me, of course. From my own sort of analyzing of why I write and how I write and what influenced me to write, etc., because it's all I've ever wanted to do. So when I see other people who are sort of struggling with it, I don't know how to shut up. If somebody has a question, somebody needs help. My entire business, being a plot whisperer, came out of being at conferences and sitting around with fellow writers and having them go, I'm having trouble with the story, and me going, all right, tell me, and then fixing it, to the point where there would, like, a small line would form where people would just keep like, wait, I'm next, and would just sit there like next to me. And I would do it, and it was just, I didn't look at it as, oh, I'm helping people. I look at it as, I'm having fun. Like, this is great. Give me another plot problem. I would like to fix it. So, and I love being there for other writers and encouraging them, because I had a very negative experience in college, in a novel writing class, that basically gave me writer's block that lasted almost 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a very negative experience. And so I try to, like, combat that. It's not necessarily about my opinion, like, oh, you're a great writer, though that's a great story. That's not it. That's not for me to judge. My whole thing is, if you want to try it, do it, and let's find out the best way for you to do it and come up with your best book. So
Which
that's
is which is kind of a motto for you.
yes, write your best book.
Write your best book right now.
Yes. What is the best book that you can write right now? Because it changes from your first book to your fifth book to your 10th book. The process is both the same and completely different because books all come from a different place. So, what can you best do for yourself to write your best book at this moment?
Right. So you mentioned the Writer's Garage. What is new for you coming up to 2023? Do you have some new things in mind?
Yes, there are several things that are going to happen in 2023. 2022, in a lot of ways, was experimenting and see what works. So, plot whispering still going on, developmental editing still going on. We'll be introducing something called Pod, and it's first book Pod. Woo. And it's essentially taking writers, either one or two or singly, and taking through them the process of writing their first book. So, talking about pre writing, talking about an idea versus a story, talking about world building, and then encouraging them step by step until they have a finished first draft.
Awesome. Sounds amazing.
I'm very excited about it.
What are some of your most favorite um, pieces of advice, and when you're talking about the pre-writing and how to even get started? Where do people start?
Um, I think the first place to start is actually idea versus story.
Mhm.
Because a thing will pop into our head. Maybe it's a scene or a character, an idea, like, a Christmas movie about a girl who moves to a small town and also investigates a serial killer as she discovers the true meaning of Christmas. I saw that on a tweet, so I'm not like original about that. Um, but like, okay, that's an idea, that's not a story. So a lot of the first book thing is about deciding on what's the book that you can write right now. If you're writing your first book, maybe your first book shouldn't be book one in a 13 book epic about a lost civilization on Mars. Like maybe it could be, but maybe right now, as you're getting your sea legs, you want to decide on a smaller story or something you could finish. Because one of the things that will kill a book before it's written or will kill a writer's love for it is too many unfinished manuscripts, because then you become convinced, oh, I can't write a book because I've never finished any of those things. And my thing is, maybe you're just starting at the wrong spot.
Right.
Like maybe you haven't determined you have a story, you have a great idea. Well, let's massage this until it's an actual story. And then you have the parts, then you can start.
Right. And how do you know if you've got the parts?
Um, you kind of have to run it through, and that's where pre-writing comes in, where you sort of take your idea and you go, okay, so who is this person who would move to a small town to discover the true meaning of Christmas and end up stalking a serial killer? Like what is the setting? Who is this person? Who does she meet? What's my ultimate goal? And so you sort of play with scenarios
Mhm.
of what kind of story do you want to tell? Is this a funny story? Is it a serious story? Is it horror tinged? Is it a mockery of Hallmark films? Is it a celebration of Hallmark films, but with a serial killer? You sort of play with all these ideas. And once you start playing with them, then you'll discover one or two threads where you go, oh, that leads to this and that leads to this. And suddenly you have an idea that can support a beginning, middle, and end.
Right. Well, you recently did a workshop on id. How does id play a part in that process?
So it came out of I had forgotten that I was teaching a writer's voice class at a conference, and somebody reminded me like 5 days beforehand, and I went, okay, I need to come up with something. So as I was examining author's voice, I started thinking about id, and it is sort of in psychology. I like to describe it through all the psychological terms. I'll just take it down to it's your inner 5-year-old. It wants what it wants now. It's pure desire. It doesn't operate on it's not time for lunch or it's time for bed. It does not operate on rules. It just is desire that wants to be filled by a specific thing. And I sort of started thinking about that as a a person as they consume things. And when you're a writer, you consume things differently than other people.
Mhm.
For better or for worse. But I started thinking, like, what is the stuff that influences us before we get the idea that we're going to be a writer? And so I started thinking about like what we consume when we're younger and who we are and how all these things meld together. So eventually we start telling ourselves stories in our head. Maybe it started when you were younger, a little bit older. Before we ever pick up a pen, we tell ourselves stories, and
Mhm.
they are just for us. The stories I tell in my head are not fit for public consumption because they're entirely based on this is the stuff that makes Terry happy. And you might not care, but it makes me so happy. So I just started this whole process, and I got really interested in your id as a writer. Like why we write what we write is based on what we've consumed and how we rearrange that in our head. So I always think of every story is either your approval of a certain trope or it's your rejection of a certain trope.
Mhm.
So you write a story based on I love everybody who writes Cinderella stories like this, or you write it like screw everybody, my Cinderella is different. And so it's all based on what you consumed and how you process it. So I have recently become interested in reader id, because I feel like readers pick things based on their id. They know exactly what they want. And I don't think that sometimes marketing language or marketing in general speaks to readers and what they really want to read. And everything is sort of a crapshoot. You pick it up and you're like, that sort of sounds what I want to read.
Mhm.
Um, I saw a book advertised as Umbrella Academy meets Tana French. And I was like, on the one hand, I'm intrigued because I love both those things. On the other hand, I don't know what you think that means. I know what I think that means. I don't
Mhm.
know what you think. So I'm just very interested in how writers feed themselves and what influenced them to write their stories. So this is part of the whole process thing. I'm taking it all the way back to your childhood. Like I'm
Yeah.
taking it all the way back to, did you like Zoom or Sesame Street? Because I think that that is all building blocks to
Mhm.
become the reader or the writer that you are.
So during this process, like, have you been going back to revisit some of these things that interested you, and do they hold up? Do they still have the same feelings? Have you rejected anything yet?
What's interesting is that when I created the id workshop, I developed this list that you start with a list of everything you can think of that you love, and not just stuff you're like, yeah, I enjoyed that, but stuff that even 20 years later or 30 years later, if somebody mentions it, your little antenna go like, what? And you don't just go, I love that too. You have to wait to see what the opinion is because they might have the wrong opinion of it, or they might pick the wrong ship. Like it's a whole thing that goes through your head. But that list is very interesting because at first glance, it looks like a big pile of these things have nothing in common. And then each step of the workshop is sort of whittling down the list to base concepts and tropes and archetypes. And it becomes almost embarrassing to look at it and go, oh, I'm really obvious about what I like. Like it doesn't seem like it. I can pretend like these are different, but they're really not because I'm really just pinging on the same things in each project. So since I asked other people to do it, I did it myself. I created a long list, and yes, I've been going through and revisiting things. And I have to say, for the most part, things have not disappointed me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's still moments of things that I've watched, even if I'm sitting here going, this is a cheesy mess. A moment will come on, like watching Lost in Space, the original, and seeing these moments and being like, this is cheesy and ridiculous. But then coming up on an episode that I remember like hitting me and watching and being like, yeah, I really like that moment. I really love that character. It's amazing. The characters I love do not change.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be fascinating because that means that it's stuck in my head more than just a childhood.
Yeah. Do you mean the characters, like that specific character, or that character type?
That character type, but also that character. So if you make a list of all my favorite characters when I was young to current day, they are embarrassingly just shades of each other. It's embarrassing. They're always the grumpy hero who doesn't feel he deserves love. It is truly embarrassing how specifically on point it is. And it was interesting going all the way back to Lost in Space, which was maybe I was 4 or 5 years old, maybe, that I was just like, oh, okay. So blame all my cranky heroes on Don West, the pilot of the ship. So
Yeah.
blame it all on them. But recently, my son and I decided to trade shows. So he picked a show for us to watch together that he loved, and I picked a show for us together to watch together that I loved. So we've been watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine for him because I'm notoriously like meh on comedies. And I've been making him watch X-Files, show of my heart. And that has been a very interesting experience, mostly because he will watch an episode. For example, the pilot, we watched the pilot, and about halfway through, he goes, "Is this one of these shows where it takes forever for them to get together?" And I was like, yes. So much, yes, just buckle in. This is going to take a while. And when I told him how long, he was just, oh. But it's very funny to me to watch it with him. He's 23. And him, like his sheer annoyance at times where he's just like, oh my God, just kiss already. And I feel like I've raised him right. Or they'll do something, he'll go, platonic coworkers, my ass. And I'm like, I have done such a good job raising him that he can watch this and just be completely correct in his feelings and assumptions. It's very funny to me to listen to his reactions, but it's also hard because sometimes he'll say stuff and I'll be like, I can't tell you, but don't get attached to anybody but the two main characters. It's pretty much the extent of it. Sorry.
And how has that brought you back into how you teach it? Watching all that stuff again and reprocessing it.
It's interesting because you kind of look at your own patterns and you also think about what is the stuff that I love to write as opposed to the stuff that I don't like, because part of the id thing is also looking at the stuff that you're just like, no, I don't want that. I don't like that. And as a writer, sometimes we feel like I should try everything. I should go outside my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should expand your abilities, but I think going outside your comfort zone is not always a great thing, because you're literally forcing yourself to sit in a trope or an archetype or a genre that you don't actually enjoy. And I don't know how you can write effectively if you don't like where you're sitting or you don't like what you're doing. I of course tell my infamous shifter story. I do not read shifters. I'm not a shifter fan. I do like a good werewolf on occasion, but I'm not a shifter person. But years ago when everybody was writing shifters, I thought, I can do it. I'm a writer. I can figure this out. I can write a shifter thing. So I had an idea and I wrote it all out. Like I had a full treatment start to finish, and I read it back and I realized at no point did anybody shift in the story.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to write shifters. So whatever my idea was, shifting was not a priority as I was telling the story. That does not bode well for people who like shifter books reading a book of mine.
Right.
So that's what I mean. Like, I agree that you should sort of push your boundaries a little, like try something a little harder, but you can try stuff harder in your comfort zone.
Right. I want to circle back to X-Files because X-Files was a great show for me. I loved X-Files. I have not seen it. I have not seen it since it originally aired. But you have some visual aids that are delightful.
So my visual aids, I frequently use them when I am doing a Zoom call or a Zoom consult,
Mhm.
when I want to articulate a point, but I decide to use visuals. And here are my visuals. Look how adorable they are. Although the height thing, no.
They're so cute.
I have to get a Scully box for her to stand on. Um, I also use them as a great reminder because when it comes to tropes and characters, I love Friends to Lovers is my all-time favorite.
Mhm.
Friends to Lovers between two people who are not inherently romantic or believe in love. Keep going. One character who does not feel deserving of love, and the other one who is too controlled to give up any control to fall in love is literally my zenith, and that would be
Mulder and Scully.
platonic friends, or as I like to do it, like. So we have to wait 7 seasons. I also have action. Mulder and Scully.
You
Uh,
you have every day, and then you have the sport version.
we're in Antarctica being platonic. Oh no, it went like this. Being platonic workmates. As I frequently go to Antarctica to rescue a platonic workmate whose company I enjoy. I would miss you around the office, so I think I will risk my life to save yours. So yeah, so my visual aids sit here as my reminder of what my touchstone of characters is. And plus they just make me laugh as they're standing there.
Or jumping
Or
around on your
or
desk.
falling off. Frequently, if you are ever on Zoom conferences with me, there'll be a clang and a crash, and that is usually one of them for whatever reason, just randomly falling off my shelf. I don't know why, but every once in a while, Mulder throws himself into my garbage can, which I think is just his internal angst.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, also the truth is out there. You never
which
know.
I never know. Like aliens try to abduct him off my computer, but I'll be talking to somebody and there'll be a crash, and I'll go, "I'm sorry, excuse me, Mulder just threw himself in the garbage." So I think there's a metaphor there for his character. I don't really
Yeah,
know.
I think that's hysterical. But you brought up the tropes and themes and stuff like that, which I think is a perfect transition to going into our deep dive of your catalog. Um, for people following at home on a secondary device, if you'd like to scan the QR code, that should take you right to Terry's website. And then let's start with just a brief mention of how many books you've written. What do you think when you see all your books together? You know, you have an overall sense of pride for what you've accomplished.
I do, but I look at it and I'm like, there's 16 books. I write so slow. I really do. But that's
16
okay.
books. 16 books in how long? I mean, that's not real slow.
Well, 13 years, I guess.
Yeah.
13 years. About that. I don't really remember. I started writing Faith and Fidelity 23 years ago, but I've only been published in the past like 12 or 13 years.
Okay. That's still saying something. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who have tried and have not gotten this far. So,
I know. And one of my favorite authors of all time has written 2 books.
oh,
So I try not to, I won't criticize myself too much.
okay. So, we are going to go to the first slide. And this is not all of your contemporary books, but it is the majority of your um, um, contemporary books. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this so that the covers are as large as possible. So wave goodbye, Terry. We'll see you at the end. So now we are on the slide for the bulk of your contemporary books. And I'd like to start with the Faith and Fidelity series because I've heard you say many times that this is your most popular series. This is your flagship series, right?
Yes.
Where did the bulk of the idea of this series start, and what can you tell us as a general whole of this series, what to expect?
This came out of a weird dream I had when I was pregnant with my son, the aforementioned 23-year-old, about an emotionally my husband, an emotionally distant father who has to raise his child or children after his wife passes away. And so like weird pregnancy dreams. I was having not a great pregnancy at the time. And because I'm a writer, I didn't just take that as that was an idea. It wasn't a story. I knew I wanted him to fall in love again. So I asked myself, what's the most difficult way for him to fall in love again? And I said, oh, another man. And that was the genesis of the series. I really just wrote it as a way to finally break out of that 5 years of writer's block that I was still in. I wrote a chapter a week in a writer's group. And so it came about slowly, but it really sort of rescued me from this place I was feeling so bad that I couldn't write anymore. And then once I think I got to the chapter with Jim in it and then thought, oh, well, there has to be another book because I need to write Jim's book. And then I decided, oh, it'll be a trilogy. There'll just be 3 of them. And I felt like, oh, I'll wrap it up. Everything's fine. I don't remember why Cherish came about. I just remembered it was a novella that I wrote. And when I went to a new publisher, they were like, we'd love to publish them, but Cherish can't be published alone because it was too short. And I thought, all right, well, I'll write Blessed. And by the time that happened again, it had been a couple of years, but once I got back into the characters, I was like, all right, let's go. And then we decided to do the 5th book, which is Truth and Tenderness, which is a little bit bigger. And the world had really grown at that point. You know, I love a lot of characters. I grew up on soap operas and multi-generational historical novels. So I love the concept of a lot of people because to me that keeps the drama going and the action going, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought I was done after Truth and Tenderness. And then we decided to do Forever and Ever, but I knew I didn't want another plot that put any couples in danger. And by that, I mean emotional danger, because Truth and Tenderness is a lot going on and there's a lot of things resolved, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't want to make a mess of everybody's lives because I feel like I got them to a certain place. And I didn't want an overwhelming theme of like everybody kept saying, are you going to write another book? And I was like, do you want me to break up Matt and Evan? I don't want to break them up. Do you want me to break them up? Also, I had written a freebie in my newsletter, Christmas Story. And so then I got the idea of why don't I just do a bunch of short stories,
Right.
or each chapter would be a different chapter in their lives. So, you know, kids growing up and grandkids and things happening and what happens when you're older. And my mom had been sick and passed away. And so that was kind of also in my head. What growing older means and how you look differently on events in your life, et cetera, et cetera. So, and plus I had never told the story of the elopement, which I had hinted about, but I was like, all right, you guys have stuck with me for so long. We're going to get it. We're going to get the secret wedding. So it was nice to really put a bow on it. Like Truth or Tenderness was just a lot going on in the stories. And so we got to the end and like, everybody's okay. But Forever and Ever sort of felt like a true bow and a true thank you to all the fans who had stuck with me for so long, and enjoyed the series so much.
When you're talking grandkids, going back to the first book, they're in their 40s, right? How long, not how long did it take to write these books, but how long do the books cover when we're talking grandkids already?
Well, Evan's kids are older. 2 of his kids are late teens and 2 of them are younger.
Right.
So I would say the whole series probably spans 15 to 18 years in their lives.
Okay.
Yeah, about that. Only my editor knows because she keeps track of how old everybody is. That's her job. I write a solid book. She corrects my grammar and how I screw up people's ages. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's about 18 years in their lives.
Are there any specific tropes or anything you want to highlight?
Of course, my beloved friends to lovers.
Mhm.
Um, between somebody who's sort of emotionally closed off and somebody who is very free and easy when it comes to having sex, but has never truly been in love before. So they come at love in very different ways. And the idea of commitment. So that's like my king trope right there. And then the second couple is Jim and Griffin, who are essentially a one night stand that just keeps going. And a little bit of a May December, there is an age difference. But my second favorite trope, which is grumpy but lovely human being and, you know, happy sunshine, who's full of sarcasm. And he's sort of, Jim is sort of this quiet, closed off, like, I'm going to growl at you. And Griffin is like, I don't care. And that's, you know, my second favorite um, couple to write. But it's very much about found family and creating not just love, but also friendship and helping each other out. A lot of these people have to deal with life events later on, and they don't have a support system, but they have each other.
Right.
So.
Right. So the main series is Evan and Matt, and then Jim and Griffin, they make appearances.
Yes,
Or Jim,
Love and Loyalty is Jim and Griffin's book. Jim shows up briefly in the first book. The second book is Jim and Griffin. A lot of people don't like that because Matt and Evan are not in it, but it's absolutely one of my favorite books that I've ever written. I think it's a wonderful book, and I hope people will give it a chance if they decide to give the series a chance. By the third book, it's still Matt and Evan's overall universe, but Jim and Griffin play a large part in it.
gotcha. So we're going to go down to the two anthologies next because that is going to lead to Snowmageddon. But tell us about the two anthologies.
So both the two other authors, Al Brownlee and Eliza J. Davis, are very good friends of mine. We were friends before we were published authors. I've known them a long time, and we were talking. We decided to do One Night After Ever was the first anthology, and our theme was a one night stand that keeps going. And this was sort of a test for me to be able to prove to myself that I could write a novella, also to write a story from one point of view, because I usually do dual point of view, or however many characters there are, the main characters, and sort of write a hero that was a little bit of a dick. Not a bad guy, because I don't write bad guys, but he's a little bit of a dick. His nickname is One Night Wyatt, and he loves the chase. He loves the one night stand. And then he's just, thank you all for coming. Bye-bye. It was a fun story to write. I had, again, this experience of writing from one character's point of view and having to get the reader to understand why this other character was somebody that they would fall in love with. It was a fun experience. I really enjoyed it. But of course, there's lots of characters. There's found family, there's sarcasm. It's literally a Tere Michaels book. But it was my test to myself to see if I could write kind of a dick falling in love.
And then the second one is a holiday theme.
Yes, I was again going through a bit of a writer's block. I had this very specific vision of a guy standing in front of a mirror dressed like an elf, kind of bemoaning his life. And I was like, all right, let's see where this goes. That story was about Nate and Sean, who both find themselves working on a holiday show, and both of them desperately need a roommate. Nate, because his former stepbrother has haired off and he can't afford the rent, and Sean, because he is renting a room in like the depths of Brooklyn and the commute is killing him. And so they become holiday roommates, and of course, shockingly fall in love. That was, again, just a fun story to write. I loved Nate. Writing Nate. Sean is a great character, but Nate is probably one of my three favorite characters that I've ever written, because he's got the soul of a Borscht Belt comedian, which during a certain period of time, there were in upstate New York, there were places where families would spend the entire summer, and you would always have this sort of really bad comedian who would perform every night. And in my head, that's Nate. Nate is a reincarnated Borscht Belt comedian. He is constantly with the jokes, there's always a patter to it. And Sean kind of calls him out on it. Sean's a producer and is sort of like, you're always acting. And it sort of leads to a revelation between the two of them. But I loved Nate and have always wanted to use him again in another story.
Yeah. which leads us to Snowmageddon and your Broadway or Bust series. How does everything on this page bring us to Snowmageddon? Because it seems like that's where everything is leading.
So weirdly enough, how I ended up in Faith, Love, and Devotion writing a story about cops, former cops, and actors slash writers slash directors, I will never quite understand. It just worked out that way. Griffin is a writer, and his best friend Daisy is a famous actress who eventually marries a director. And so there's a whole theme of like Broadway drama in the Faith, Love, and Devotion series. And then, of course, I had Nate, who is an out of work actor who has to perform as an elf in order to make rent. And so when I was writing Broadway or Bust, obviously, I had in my head, Nate has to get a job. Like, we have to have Nate show up because I love him and he's such a fun character. And then I decided, wait a second, what about some people from Faith, Love, and Devotion? And not to give too many spoilers, but some of those grandchildren grow up and end up in the book as well. And then, of course, there's a very special guest appearance by two of people's favorite characters. And I just had this idea of all these people stuck in a townhouse during a huge blizzard. And it just sort of came together with all these personalities and characters. And it was so much fun to write an introduction to the new world, but to also have some very special guest stars from my other series.
Yeah. And the sequel to this is what you're writing now.
Yes.
Awesome. Definitely looking forward to that. And I know a lot of the Coastal Magic readers are as well. So we're going to now move to the second slide. And the majority of these are action adventure in some way. But then let's go ahead and start with the two contemporary stories you have on this one so that we keep those together. Tell us about Groomzilla and then the bonus short.
So Groomzilla was actually a title before it was a story. This was very early on, maybe before Duty and Devotion ever came out, but I was at a conference and talking to people, and Groomzilla just kind of popped into my head. Like, there's a Bridezilla, what if there was a Groomzilla? I had an idea, but I didn't have a story. And this goes back to what I was talking about before. I had an elevator pitch, but I didn't have a story. I didn't have the characters who would make sense to me to tell this story. And so eventually I came up with Daniel and Owen, and Daniel is a corporate events person who is wrangled into doing a reality show wedding for his best friend, who is an over-the-top dramatic Groomzilla, who is a fashion designer who wants this big over-the-top wedding and sort of guilts Daniel into coming on and doing this. And Daniel hates weddings and reality shows, but he loves his best friend. So he gets kind of pulled into it. As compensation, he meets Owen, who is co-producer of the reality show, and is instantly just like, yes, I will do this job because he is very pretty. It's a comedy in a lot of ways, but because it's me, there's a little bit of emotional stuff about Owen's backstory and who Daniel is and how they try to figure out how to sort of deal with the dramatic machinations of other people, two people who are not dramatic at all, trying to sort of wade through this mess of people being drama queens, except for the two of them. And so it's a rom-com, but I made myself cry in two different places. Aww. That should be another tagline of mine. It's rom-com, but you will cry at least twice. And the short Groomzilla Does Vegas is a short that's available only in the paperback version of Groomzilla, which is a follow-up to the story. And it's ridiculous, but it's romantic. I mean, I really loved Owen and Daniel because Daniel is very practical and Owen is sort of romantic, but a quiet romantic. They're not over the top people. Right. And sort of fun to play with people who they're not always demonstrative. And as they figure out how to be demonstrative, then how does that go?
Yeah. Okay, Groomzilla by itself, you can get an ebook, but if you want the short, then that is print only.
Yes.
Awesome. So now we're going to go up to the top with the standalones first, because I want to talk about Three to Get Ready. Now, this one is unlike anything else you've got in your catalog.
Well, the origin story of this is back in the day when I'm sorry, Mulder just tried to jump off the computer. Absolutely no reason. That's what that sound was. Told you it was going to happen. So Three to Get Ready is actually the first draft of Love and Loyalty, which is a very weird thing to say. But I had started to write several drafts of Love and Loyalty. And one of them was a threesome, a throuple. And it wasn't quite working for this series. I was like, I don't think this works. And I eventually ended up writing Griffin. Griffin wasn't in this story, but Griffin eventually came to me, and then I wrote Love and Loyalty and put it aside. But I still had this 2/3 finished extra book sitting on my hard drive. And then I was approached by Alora's Cave to write for them. And I was like, so I remembered this story and decided to pull it out and to rewrite it for Laura's Cave. It's very different from what I normally write because it's very dirty. I did not know I was capable of writing a book like this, to be quite honest. But because it is me, it is still a romance. It's erotic, but at the same time, it is still an MMF love story. This is not a sex only relationship. It is very clear from the beginning. There's feelings all over the place, but I was amazed that I wrote this book. And after I had written what I thought was the dirtiest thing I could write, I sent it into the editor and they were like, could you add more sex? And I was like, I literally do not think I am capable of coming up with any more sex. But I did. It was very difficult, but it is very different for me, but it still has all the elements that make it a Tere Michaels book.
Right. That works. Your other standalone is The Heir Apparent. Where did this story idea come from?
Well, it's a secret romance and it's also kind of a mystery. I really came up with really the character of Archie, who is the driver slash bodyguard, who is sort of secretly in love with Henry, who is the heir apparent, the only child of a very wealthy man. And they've known each other since they were children, and they've sort of developed into a secret affair. But it's not really something Henry can come out to his father and be like, I'm gay. Also, I'm sleeping with my bodyguard slash driver. So it's a secret romance and sort of a commoner prince in a lot of ways, because I almost think of Henry as, a lonely prince in a high tower, although the high tower is a New York high rise. And Archie is just a really good soul. He doesn't feel like he doesn't deserve love. So he's kind of a very mentally well person, but he's very much a hero. So he's probably one of the purest heroes I've ever written, in that he is just a good guy. And he is not going to let Henry suffer or self-destruct as much as Henry wants to.
Right. I'm a big fan of the friends to lovers trope as well. This is one of my favorite books by you. And I think I've told you that quite a few times, but I will tell all the people watching, this is one of my favorites by you.
Thank you. It was also a way for me to write a different genre, because I had been writing contemporary angsty romance for so long. I didn't necessarily want to give up the angst because I'm not sure if I'm capable of that, but I wanted to write in a slightly different genre.
Right. Well, that brings us to The Vigilantes, and these books are intense. How did this series come about?
So this is I don't know if I've told this before. I was writing some entertainment stories for a friend's website. And I had some pictures on my desktop that were going to be used in it. And one was somebody wearing a superhero outfit, and the other one was sort of a sexy, sultry pose. And these pictures were sitting on my desktop next to each other, not related to each other, but it's sort of seeped into my brain. And I love superheroes. I am a Marvel girl, 1,000%. Please try to check out my workshop, Making It Marvelous, which is based on how to write using the tropes, etc., of the Marvel universe. That's that point plug. But my original love character in comics is Batman. And so I've often called this Batman Gets a Boyfriend. In this case, it is Knox, who lives in a dystopian New York City that has been destroyed by rains and floods that have occurred 16 years before, 15 years before. And he lives with his son and is very paranoid. And at night, he goes out and sort of patrols the streets as the vigilante. And so these two pictures just like lightning flashed into my head, and I had like these weird scenes that popped into my head. And so I had to sit down because I knew, okay, I have an idea. How do I write this story? And it was so different from anything I've ever written before, because it was world building in that it's dystopian. It's very dark characters. There's not a lot of like warmth in this story, but I didn't want it to be so completely cold that it was not a Tere Michaels story. So again, it goes back to those themes of found family and relationships, you know, caring for each other, etc., but by a very prickly group of people who do not trust easily. Knox is just in his head and very brooding, and like what would get him out of it. And that's Cade, who, again, humor is a defense, sex is defense, or offense, depending on what mood he's in, and how these two people sort of get tangled together and then can't untangle themselves,
Right.
and how they fall in love with each other when neither of them believes in love or anything of the sort. They're like, this is ridiculous. Also, I'm in danger. I have no time to stop and date. So it was interesting to create a relationship that there is no dating. There is no, the courtship period involves violence. And just they get on each other's nerves so much that it was very much super fun to write. And of course, one of my favorite female characters that I've ever written is Rachel Moon. She's one of my most challenging characters I've ever written, because she does some really terrible things. But could I make her somebody that garners sympathy and interest? So, and writing action was completely not in my realm. That was honestly the hardest part, writing action and violence.
Well, for this series here, your Faith, Love, and Devotion series is complete. You are working on the second book in Broadway or Bust. Where does this vigilante series stand? Are we done, or is there more?
So, Who Knows the Moonlight was supposed to be the last book. This was originally envisioned as a trilogy. And after a very long hiatus, yes, that's right, writer's block, I came back to write Who Knows the Moonlight and decided to start at the beginning, rewrite the whole thing. Very little is as depressing as throwing out like 40,000 words that you'd already written and starting over again. But I had to, and it actually worked out better. But as I was writing, I suddenly, I don't know why, but I used a character name and I thought, that seems familiar. Have I used that name before? But I just kept going and I created this thing. And about 2/3 of the way through, I realized, oh, I've set up book 4. Without even consciously thinking about it, I had set up book 4 because there was something else that I had to resolve. The third book resolves the main plot, but the fourth book will resolve something a little bit further. But I came to realize that the name that I used and the character that I used was a minor appear in one scene character from the first book.
Nice.
But when I did it, I was like, oh, this looks like I'm brilliant. And I slipped in this character that you went, oh my God, wait, isn't that? Yes, it is. And so it was completely by accident, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just spend so much time with these characters and these stories in my head that my subconscious put something together. So yes, book 4 will be out some point next year.
Yeah. I was fixing to say, you told the story all wrong, Terry. You should have said that, yes, it was planned from the beginning. Aren't I brilliant?
No, but it was funny. I handed it to my editor, and my editor was like, did you come up with book 4? And I was like, yes, I don't know what happened. And she was like, it's fine. But yeah, it was just, I was like, who is that? Why did I use that name? That's weird.
Okie dokie. So that brings us to the end of that series. So now that brings us back to the original here. Is there anything that stands out now that you see all your books together again? Any tropes, any themes you want to mention? Any other connections? I see you've got some holiday stuff. Maybe now that we're in the holiday season, maybe highlight those.
Well, One Holiday Ever After and Snowmageddon, both obviously holiday stories, although Snowmageddon is more a winter story with a minor Hanukkah theme. But also, actually, Forever and Ever, the last book in the Faith, Love, and Devotion series, is very holiday heavy. There's a lot of holiday stories in there.
Right.
But I don't think it'll make sense if you haven't read the other books.
Holidays like all through the year, not just at one time of year, right?
Mostly Christmas. They have a celebration that all the families that eventually evolve have something called fake Christmas, where they all get together and go to a beach house for a week and pretend it's Christmas. So that's what that is. It's fake Christmas. I'm amazed at how many friends to lover stories. Like 1,000% friends to lovers or people who meet at work. But mostly friends to lovers. It's just my favorite trope. I love it. It makes me happy. I love that moment where they go from I'm looking at you as a friend to I'm looking at you with the potential to love you is just my most favorite thing in the world. So at some point I'll stop writing that, but I don't know when.
Well, do you need to stop writing that?
I don't think so. But we did talk before about pushing ourselves. I'm not going to push myself out of my comfort zone and suddenly start writing anti-hero shifters. But I like to try other things, other tropes that I enjoy. I mean, Friends to Lovers is my favorite, but there's other tropes that I enjoy. So, as I said, when I started writing Second Chance Romance, I thought this will be easy, but it presented a whole new challenge for me in that I had to think about it. Like, why weren't they together to start with? Why are they together now? That sort of thing. So I like challenging myself, but I'll always return to home base.
Yeah. Oh. Aside from all of the friends to lovers stories you have, did anything else surprise you? Or
I don't think so. Again, I have to reflect on the very specific character archetypes that are my favorite toys to play with. It's literally like it's sort of like they're little dolls in my head, and I'm like, oh, I know what I'll do. Like, you should come over here, and like in my head, I almost feel like I have action figures, but I have five, and I just sort of put them together in different ways. I don't think that's a criticism of myself, but I think that is just where my brain processes human emotions.
right. Well, Terry, thank you very much for joining us and talking about all your books and sharing some of the stories behind them.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Well, everyone, I hope you had a good time doing the deep dive, and I will see you on the next episode. Happy reading.